Hey everybody, and welcome to another RCT scenario playthrough. We are on Trinity Islands, scenario number 7. This is the last of the, beginner scenarios in the original RCT 1. And this one has a goal of 750 people by the end of year 3 with a park rating of at least 600. So the challenge with Trinity Islands is the kind of narrow land and the amount of land that you get to work with. Not super suitable for building because it's got a lot of slopes and everything like that. And since we're building this in kind of a realistic style, sort of akin to how I might think about things if I'm designing them in real life, we're going to try and keep as much of this out of the water as we can and really think about this in terms of guest flow and all of that as well. So we'll start here with a carousel because that seems like the best place to start. I always like to give carousels sort of that prime real estate place, even though they're not crazy popular except when it rains. We're going to start out right here and give ourselves a little plaza there in front too, with a little bit different land texture as well. Try and change up the land textures every now and then. Because we've got these kind of 3 different land masses, I also want to connect them with a sky ride, and I feel like that's at least an interesting transport ride too, since we don't really have too much else to work with. So we're going to use this island over here as kind of our crossing island. So we're going to have 2 sky rides in the end and go across to the 3 different islands. But we'll start out with this one. I don't intend to build out all of the islands right away. We're going to kind of slowly expand out because I don't need the guests walking every which way just from the outset here. I want to at least limit where their movements go until we get enough people in there to really justify it. So we'll place our queue and our exit right here. A little bit of a funky queue in terms of this, but there's going to be a little bit of overhang into the water here and there, and that's okay. I don't mind that so much, but I do want to try and avoid having a whole coaster go all the way into the water, the whole space, and kind of just spoil these, what I would assume is some good natural views across the whole area. It's nice little island beaches and everything else. We're probably going to get rid of some of those beaches, though, to be honest, like here, where we have a little bend in the pathway here. And actually flatten this out just a little bit and bump out the pathway here so that way we can nestle in a scrambler right here onto the beach and adjust the paths in just little ways here and there. There's no reason that you have to keep all the pathways that come with the original scenario in its location. You can really make it work for you. I like to use it as a guide too. I don't necessarily want to fully eliminate everything that the game gives me to start out with on the scenario, but I do want to at least adjust it a little bit here and there to better suit my build and make it look a little nicer. Going to raise up the land underneath. I really don't like seeing rides with the support structure showing down below. Pathways are fine because they're not, a huge heavy thing, but these entrance buildings and the rides themselves, I never really like leaving with structure underneath. So I'll raise the land there. We'll use some of those rusty pipe land texture or land side textures as a decoration there, just to give it a little bit of kind of themed look. I feel like I could have gone with wood as well, but here in the marine environment, I figure the rusty pipes might look a little nicer. We are going to eventually build ourselves a bridge across to that other island, since it is a little bit of an odd path setup. You kind of want a good loop across the whole thing, and really that's a dead end, even though the dead end ends in a loop. But you definitely want to, at least from an RCT peep standpoint, make it as simple as possible wherever possible. We haven't put in any of the food stalls yet, or restrooms or things like that, so I want to do this little boardwalk sort of thing here. So we're going to face it the opposite direction of the main guest path and kind of have these looking out on this, call it waterfront dining area, I suppose. So we'll have some benches along the way. And the intention is that we would expand that a little while later, and that's going to give us that, nice waterfront look, that midway with the double paths. I do try and do double paths wherever I can. Of course, since RCT1 doesn't really cooperate super well with like side-by-side double paths, we're going to split them up a little bit, so we're going to give that idea of a heavier use type path that's got a lot more traffic on it without having to actually double up on the paths. So the one bonus of having some terrain to work with on here is that the coasters are a lot more fun because we have some terrain to kind of go up and down on these different guys. So we're going to do that here with this junior coaster to start, so a little Zierer coaster here, which is what this type is based off of. It's a little bit slow. We've got a small lift hill to start. It doesn't need to be anything more than this, though, so that's kind of the key moment here. We've got that helix off to the side a little bit there that does stick over the water, and we do have this little final bit here. But the majority of the ride is on the land, which is the goal for the whole thing. It's not to say that you can't put stuff over the water. There's plenty of real life instances where there are rides and different things over the water, but it's also more expensive. So if you're talking from a realistic standpoint, you are generally going to avoid stuff over the water, whereas on land is at least a little more suitable. Now, granted, landscape that's got some terrain to it is also a little bit more challenging, but nonetheless, we're going to try and keep as much on the land as we possibly can. So I raised the land underneath of the station here. We aren't really building stations because we don't really have scenery to work with as far as being able to raise walls and put roofs on things and everything. We can build a landscape kind of block structure, which we may do in future scenarios, but I don't know. It doesn't necessarily feel in the spirit of the original game for that reason, so I try and avoid it a little bit. I'm going to make a couple of these little plazas too, with these bits of squares, and I thought it would be kind of neat to have a slope down on that one and wrap around the Skyride towers. I always do make sure that the Skyride towers can actually hit the ground and they don't bump into anything and have to offset. A couple different color options here for the coaster itself. So for now we're going to settle on this kind of pink and kind of icy blue look with the yellow trains. I think that looks fine. I'm going for a little bit brighter colors in this. You kind of feel like that tropical setting maybe deserves a little more brightness on the whole thing. We're going to research coasters because we don't have a lot to work with. Also, thrill rides, we're going to definitely focus on those. We don't have a lot of great rides to start with, if we're being honest, so that's going to be one of the key things here. Coasters especially, because we really need those to make some good money. That junior coaster is going to help us start that process, but until we get some kind of a larger coaster in, we are really not going to start making money. And spoiler, we're not going to do a large coaster until the next episode of this one, so there's a little bit of waiting time for us to be able to do that. So I'm adjusting some of the pathway here as we get into this car ride. I'm trying to be a little bit cognizant of how much space I take up on a particular island and make sure that I don't totally ruin myself for future build areas. But this one seems kind of large and flat, and it gives us relatively flat, we'll say. It gives us some space to work with for a car ride. We've been trying to do a little bit more car rides here in the game recently, so I do want to stick one in this space, and I think it's kind of interesting too. It's got some terrain change elevation differences. It goes over top of the Skyride, it goes underneath of the Skyride, kind of wraps all around, so I think that's a decent look and works pretty well. So we're going to use the cars, the sports cars as typical. I like the racing cars better, to be honest, but those only seat one and these seat two, so we're effectively doubling our money, which, I think that's alright. I will take that as a business decision when it comes down to it. If I ever build a second car ride, then I'll usually go with the racing cars, but in this map, we're not going to do that. But I think it works pretty well in here, and it also gives us this little kind of area here circled by the car ride on all sides, that we can put this little drink stand here, try and make ourselves a little bit of a plaza. So I'm going to move the land around just a little bit there and create some of these little bit of dead end bits that I can put some seating in. I mentioned it pretty much every time, but Andrew from Mickey Man's RCT station does these very well with these little kind of alcoves for seating around the food stalls. So we're going to definitely do that and try and make it look good, make it look a little more natural anyway. One of the things, when you're looking at real life food and beverage offerings in theme parks, they're going to be located on plazas or spaces where there's some dwell time, and we're going to try and go that way a little bit. That boardwalk that I built earlier, in real life you'd probably have them spun around because that main path is going to be the primary access that most guests are going to come in, and of course from a revenue standpoint, you want the food and beverage options at the location of most revenue, so you got to think about that a little bit. But we're going to strike a balance there of looks and reasonable thoughtfulness as far as overall cost goes. We looked around for a spot to put this a pirate ship. Of course, we've got so much water that we need to sit it on the water somewhere, I think. It feels like that's just thematically appropriate. So we'll build ourselves another little square here. That section that I had to raise and put up a little bit for the exit of the coaster actually ends up being a benefit now, because our exit can go underneath of it. It's a bit of a weird look there, but I think it works pretty well to layer some things in there. Layering is good, especially when you have a tight space to work with. So this park in general, we're going to look a little bit at layering and definitely pay a little bit more attention to that than we might otherwise do. Put our rocks and some of our darker green bushes and everything, as well as some of those post and rope fences. Definitely has that pirate vibe to it, I think, and we've really done that in pretty much every one of these scenarios so far. So we're going to do the same thing here. You know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Or, yeah. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we're going to really consider building that out a little bit more. Also to just do a little bit of adjustment here on the pathways on the start. Put a little bit of a sculpture there, so we have this sort of entry feature. Offsets a little bit, so you come in straight on that sculpture, and then off to the side you get that nice little plaza with the carousel. Coming back in here and adding a bit of fencing and some things like that. A lot of this is kind of mid-game waiting on research. So we've got our initial rides in, and we're doing pretty good there, but we're kind of waiting on some of those other major rides to stick things into this map, and I don't really want to fill it out with more car rides or things like that. But we do have our second sky ride here, so now we're thinking about how we want to put this in. Initially I thought, well, why not just cross the sky rides where we put one underneath of the other one. Thankfully these only have a 2 height clearance, so we can do that. So initially I looked at doing this like a little bit of a trench here and running it up this way, and then we'd run the pathway kind of along the side of the hill here and over. The more that I thought about it, though, the less I kind of liked this area, so and also kind of where it was going to hit on the other side of the island. So thinking through this a little further, I said, okay, well, why not move it to the other side? Really, one of the bigger issues there is if we kept it underneath, I wanted to make sure that we could actually have an entrance hut and an exit hut, which we wouldn't have been able to do if it was on the other side. So we're going to rebuild that pathway a little bit closer over top, and we're going to put this sky ride station underneath of that pathway, which I think is kind of a fun way to do it. Again, using that layering, and get a nice little subterranean entry there. So now this lets us put a crossing on the other one here, and we can adjust this pathway just a little bit here, and we'll build this out a little bit further here later. We can dip down for our exit, and we can raise back up for our entrance on the other side too. There's always a little bit of a balance as to how much you want to adjust the land so that the pathway sits flat and how much you want to put it up on stilts. I try not to, as best as possible, put the pathways up onto supports, just because they don't necessarily look super good. But I am a little bit cognizant, at least, about really adjusting the land in a way that's going to look stupid. So trying to avoid that as best as we can. I'm going to give this a little bit more height to space the towers out a little bit. I always like to come out of a station, go a few tiles at least before that first tower, and then put the next tower that levels it out up at the higher end, then go across and then drop down. If I've got a really long span, I do try and adjust the towers partway through and adjust the height a little bit so that there are kind of mid-stage towers, because you really don't see, especially with this type of a cable car sky ride, you really don't see super long spans without a tower. Even this is fairly long for some of these, but I do try and make sure that I at least have those in there. It would be great if there was an option in the game to just add a tower while on the flat, and while you can certainly do that with custom scenery, in our instance here there's not a whole lot that we can do for that. But now we've got our next sky ride up and running, so now we have good transport ride access to both sides, which I think is a good move there. Now we have the whole thing opened up. We've got enough people. We've got nearly 400 guests, so I think we're doing okay for that one. I am going to color the sky rides too, so we got the yellow line and the red line, so just give it some easy guest iconography so that they can easily find where they're going. Not that these RCT guests have a whole lot going on for them, but we will give it at least a little bit of help there. You can see I expanded our boardwalk area there, moved that tree over, so that as we research more of the food stalls, we can just stick them in there. I do tend to avoid researching food stalls right away, especially if I have at least something, whether it's a food or a drink. Ideally, I have one of each. But really, I want to prioritize researching thrill rides and coasters. Thrill rides are a good cheap option to start, especially if you get like an SNS drop tower or something like that. But the coasters obviously are kind of the key element there. I just want to be able to build up a little bit of cash on the starting side to really get going so that we can do that. So generally, if I can stop a couple of flat rides in there and start generating a little bit of revenue, then I can come back with the coasters and go the rest of the way. So we've typically, up until now on this scenario series, have placed our haunted houses up on a hill or like in a little valley and kind of surrounded them by trees and stuff. But this time we're going to stick it out here on the water, out on this little kind of, I don't know, not really a precipice, I suppose, but a kind of little peninsula here as it sticks out into the water. So kind of thought this is like the, I don't know, haunted sea captain's house or something. I don't really know what your backstory is, but I'll put some kind of rocky things on here. Maybe think about this in terms of there being shipwrecks or something around it, and go this direction. So I do still go through with the landscape around the building and try and screen it a little bit as best as we can. And we are still going to use these bushes and everything and really kind of fill this in with a little bit of this overgrown nature to it. The haunted house, again, like the pirate ship, is sort of this easy button in terms of theming, is that you definitely want to have that similar look to everything. Put that horse sculpture there, and or statue, I suppose, and then we'll put these darker green hedges, so the conifer hedges. I feel like these are a good way to make your foliage appear denser as well. These conifer hedges, as well as the regular kind of brighter green hedge. I think the conifer one probably works better just because it's a bit of a darker green. I think that one probably is the better look when you're just trying to go for landscape density anyway. But we're going to drop some of these other larger conifer trees in here too to give it a little bit of darkness as well. I feel like it's kind of a neat boardwalk queue out there to the house itself. I think that's kind of a neat little vibe there. I can kind of picture that as a real thing. So we'll get our pathway layout and everything going in here, kind of putting it off to the side a little bit for this area. I'm going to put some scattered bushes and things. Of course, we got to use our little spooky fence, as we always call it, with that wrought iron and the little brick at the bottom of it. Super useful fence, but it definitely has that spooky vibe to it for whatever reason, so we're going to keep with it and go that way. I'm pretty happy with the way that the path layout is turning out at this point as well. It's not super complicated, and we definitely want to keep it as simple as we can in general, but we also wanted to meander a little bit. You know, in theme parks, you're not as concerned with getting from point A to point B as fast as earthly possible. You're really concerned about giving guests an experience, and I want to make sure that we've got that, you know, sort of that bit of discovery and things like that as we craft that walkway. Give ourselves a little boat hire here and stick that in the water. We're going to use the water tricycles only because we haven't done that yet, so we'll let those guests kind of go and have a bit of a free-for-all there. They're going to go outside the park boundary for some reason. Not quite sure how that works, but nobody's stolen one yet, so we'll take it. I'm also going to raise the sections underneath of the Skyride support columns when they're out over the water. That's not to say that you wouldn't see these in the water as well, but generally from a design best practices standpoint, you'd probably put them on a pylon or some kind of a pile cap for concrete, whether that's some kind of a landscape bunker or concrete or whatever it may be. It'll generally be out of the water, so that's what we're going to do in this instance. Now that we've unlocked our info kiosk, we can start selling some umbrellas at least. Not for $25, but we can still sell them. So I'll put a little pathway around here. I do try wherever possible to have 4 pathways worth of connection to the info kiosk, only because the way that the thing is drawn, it definitely has 4 windows on either side. So I feel like if you don't put it on the whole thing, it looks a little funky. So I try wherever possible to surround the thing with path, but you know, it doesn't always quite work out that way. Alright, now we're going to enter our last of the track rides for this part video. This is our log flume here, and this is just one that we had unlocked while we were waiting on other coasters, so this will be a good one and a good money maker for us. I always start with the drop because I feel like that's the best way to really sight these things, because your focal point for a log flume almost always is the drop. So I want to make sure that I'm going to get that in the right spot. So we'll start there, we'll build around to our entrance and exit to the station platform there, and then from there kind of fill in the gaps in between. Put a little bit of a tunnel there. As much as I say that I avoid tunnels, log flumes kind of get a little bit of a pass just because they're typically older attractions, they're typically opening day attractions, and a lot of times you'll see those with tunnels on them. Opening day attractions are absolutely more likely to have extra spend on various things like that, because when you're spending it all at once, it's a lot easier to swallow than if you're doing it as a single addition to a park, for example. So like a newer log flume that might be built might not have that same kind of, underground stuff or anything that's like terribly expensive compared to just the ride hardware itself, just because now you gotta only pay for that and the return is based on just that addition. So a little bit of a thought process there when you think through the building process. We haven't really assigned any kind of a timeline to this park, which I think would be maybe a little bit of overkill to think about it that way, but I do at least want to think in a logical way, and that's what this whole series is about, right? So the log flume itself has 2 lifts and 1 big drop, and then a couple of like little bits and pieces, and then we wind around too. I try not to put too many straight pieces in because it's just really want to just meander around on the whole thing, and really I think that's what makes the log flume what it is in real life as well as the game. The only exception to that is, of course, after the splashdown, you want to give the boat sufficient time to slow down to regular speed before you go around a corner. In real life, that would be a bad thing if a log flume's coming at a corner with any kind of speed, because you don't want that boat to come out of the trough, for example. We've got kind of a little bit of an awkward station here, at least station location here being underneath of the drop. So our entrance is kind of half buried there, and then our exit leads to this little walkway deck that you can go out and see the thing. That's kind of fun sometimes to put a crossing over top of the drop, although that's more so a splash boats thing, which aren't really a thing here in RCT 1, but it is a decent bit of interaction from a guest standpoint. Not that the guests are really going to use it, but we'll put some benches out there in case they ever want to give it a try. So now that it's done, we'll go through and add a little bit of those wood sidewalls there. It just kind of feels like that's the right fit for a log flume theme. Just the wood rustic look. I mean, hell, log is in the name, so it feels like the right thing to do. I'm also going to develop out a little bit of a plaza here up top as well, lower the section of land. While this is the largest of the 3 islands, this one is probably the most difficult to build on, only because it's got the mountain that pretty much runs across the whole thing. So trying to avoid just totally flattening it, because I feel like that's really not in the spirit of the thing. So we're going to try and make it work along the whole thing. So there's our nice little plaza there. We did pull away a little bit of it. So now we got the log flume in there. We got a nice tracked ride to work with, and we're going to get started next on a custom coaster layout, probably the signature coaster of the map. So because we're going to do that in part 2, we will tease a little bit here and have you guess if anybody would like to take a stab at what you think the coaster would be. No cheating if you already saw the stream, but let me know what you think we're going to build here next as we dig ourselves a little trench right here. But that's it for this video. Come on back to part number 2, where we will complete this scenario and see the conclusion. I appreciate you watching as always, and have a great day. Thank you very much.